We, let's be honest, are living in uncertain times. For many of us, we are fearing the economy and what the future will look like in terms of prospects for a future job or retaining your current job. For many of us, there's a rising cost in our daily goods and services that we need, like gas, paying for our mortgage, your property insurance.
And on top of that, the immigration laws are changing very rapidly and very frequently. And we are all seeing what's happening around us, right? And that leads to a lot of fear because even being a naturalized citizen, your stay in the country is not safe and secure.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
My name is Hannah Locop. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Florida field organizer for APIA Votes. I was born and raised right here in Florida, and I currently live in Miami. Shout out, yes.
Good afternoon. Good to see you all. Thank you, Hannah, for allowing me to co-present with you today. I am Sunayana Dumala. I go as she or her pronouns. I am representing Asian American Pacific Islander Coming Together. We go short as ACT. It's a Central Florida-based not-for-profit organization. Prior to moving into nonprofit, I was a data engineer. I used to live in Kansas. I'm been in Orlando for about 3 years now. So, yeah.
Yes, shout out to Orlando. Thank you, Sunayana. I want to share a little bit about what APIA Vote does. We are the premier leading organization in civic engagement for the Asian American Pacific Islander community across the nation. We are nonpartisan, and we primarily empower, engage, and educate our community about the power of voting and our civic process. Civic engagement is an important aspect of our path as we grow as leaders. When we leave the door of our home or our office, we are still people, and we still have a role to play in our community. And voting, or getting your friends and family to vote, is a key way in which we can build power as a community. But if you are a voter, you've probably had experience with maybe the partisan side or the candidate side, which is not us. So those are folks who are trying to get a particular leader elected, usually under a particular party. And sometimes that type of work can be seen as transactional by folks in the community and by folks like us. Sometimes community organizations can feel like they're just simply a number, but we know that that's not true. That's why there are really great benefits of the nonpartisan approach, which actually happens all year round. So you may be thinking to yourself, there's not an election this year. Actually, there is. There's an election every single year, but we really try to work to build relationships with community members, whether you're in a church or a student group. We try to build voting to be a part of a culture so that it's automatic every time you have that opportunity, and to make sure we build leaders so that beginning in high school or college, folks already know the importance of being involved in the civic process, and that helps them grow whether they enter into the corporate world, the nonprofit world, or anywhere else. I also want to touch on the impact that we're making. So did anyone know there are 20 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this country? Did anyone know that? Yeah, there are. And 15 million of us are actually eligible to vote. And we are actually the fastest growing immigrant group in this country. We also have the highest number of first-time voters in 2024. Additionally, we also have the fastest growth rates among voter groups as compared to others. So you can see on this graph, over the last few presidential cycles, more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been participating. So you might be asking, okay, Hannah, so if we're voting, why are we here? Why do we continue to need to educate folks? Well, as you can see on the graph to the left with the blue bars, our population who is eligible to vote continues to rise. And on the red bars, that's who's actually casting a ballot. If you look at 2024, that's less than half of people who were eligible to vote actually made a decision to vote last year. So that means we have more work to do to make sure folks are making an educated decision about their decision at the ballot box. So 15 million translates to about 6.5% of the electorate. And if you think that's small, I will tell you there are elections that are decided by a smaller percentage than 6.5%. API Vote, we have a robust program where we send mail to voters all around the country. We call people, we door knock, and together we've reached a little bit over 3 million of us. And in terms of the power that we've built, one example is who we've elected, right? So only 19 representatives in the US House currently are Asian American or Pacific Islander, which is about 4% of that body. Together as a community, we are 6% of the US population. So if we wanted to have the right amount of power equal to how many people we have, we still have work to do. And that's where you all come in. We're going to do a little bit of a quiz now.
Yes. So any guesses of what the top states with the most naturalized citizens in the US are? Of course. Yes. Any more?
Sorry, I moved the slide.
Yeah. You went through the slide.
Yes, shout out to our friends in California, New York, Texas, New Jersey, Illinois. You all, we're going to send you all out to knock doors now. That's what it is. Thanks, Sunayana, for the quiz. On this graph, I know it's a little hard to see, but I'll walk you through it. One of the reasons why we are reaching our community to vote is because we know that when people come to this country, not everyone is starting in the same place. So on the left, the chart is trying to depict who has the greater English language proficiency and who more often operates using their own language from their own country based on ethnicity. And we believe at API Vote that regardless of what language you speak, you have the right to vote. And you deserve resources that are in language that you yourself can understand and share with your friends and family. So one of the things we're fighting for is language accessibility for information around voting. On the right, I thought it was important to highlight income as well. As you know, Election Day is not a holiday yet. And so for many of us, we are busy putting food on the table, getting our kids to school, taking care of things in order to run a home. And not all of us have the privilege of taking a day off or taking a few hours off. So we want to work towards a world in which, regardless of how much money you make, no matter where you come from, and if you have the right to vote, you are able to do that in the easiest way possible. A little bit more information on equity, specifically here in Florida. Are there any Floridians in the room? Woo! Awesome. So here's some information on the top languages spoken from our community here. Maybe you can find yourself represented. And then some socioeconomic statistics as well, around insurance, poverty levels, access to the internet. We don't necessarily think of these things as being a part of the voting process, but really every aspect of our life is influenced by policy, right? So that's why we all should have the right and the ability to influence that through voting.
And cultural norm and stigma is one of our biggest challenge, as we all know about that. As somebody from India and who grew up in India for almost like 22 years, I've seen a different setup. And then as an immigrant and the first generation, like you all said, we are all in survival mode. And we are also taught to just mind our business, keep focused on your careers, your goals, like go mode. And because of which we are stopped from raising our voices and standing up for ourselves. And in many ways, because we are introduced to a different set of political environment from where we come from, that also influences of how we see things here. I'm going to give my own example. I came from India, and I was used to a completely different political environment back home. I never knew how easy it was to access your representative or walking into their rooms. That was like never possible kind of a thing. But when I moved here, when I actually started involving in advocacy work and this type of work, that's when it opened my experience. It changed my outlook that, oh, I can just walk and get an appointment with my representative's office. I can just share what's troubling me, that each representative is supposed to have town halls, an opportunity for his residents to go and speak out, and even to go to Capitol, like the House and the Senate, and to schedule appointments and going there and advocating for your causes, and how easy it is to do that. And so lack of awareness also plays a role. So, and then trust. And I think in most of our Asian communities, through our research, we found out that we are more comfortable within our own communities. We trust information that comes from our close circles. That is also adding up to these challenges. And you want to go more, Hannah?
Yes. Thanks for setting me up so well, Sunayana. And a lot of you touched on this already. So we lack trustworthy sources of information that provide facts in English and in other languages, especially on platforms like WhatsApp, WeChat. I'm Filipino. If you're Filipino, you know we're on Messenger. And in terms of fighting that, we need to be the people that our friends and family rely on to have reliable, accurate information. We also, unfortunately, have laws that restrict people from having an easy access to registering to vote. For example, here in Florida, if you want to vote by mail, you have to reapply every election cycle. If you don't reapply, you can't vote by mail. And so asking the voter to remember all of our deadlines, it's unreasonable. That's why we need organizations and community members to continue to remind each other. We also have folks, right, who come from other parts of the world where government surveillance is very real. Government surveillance in our current country, people are fearful of receiving like official looking mail. We also need information that's translated in all of our languages. And I think it was Priya who mentioned, we don't see people who look or sound like us in government. We're getting there, but a part of that will come with more of our community stepping up and taking our power. So on top of the normal challenges, that's the normal challenge, right, with civic engagement. We, let's be honest, are living in uncertain times. For many of us, we are fearing the economy and what the future will look like in terms of prospects for a future job or retaining your current job. For many of us, there's a rising cost in our daily goods and services that we need, like gas, paying for our mortgage, your property insurance. And all of those things make it harder for people to think about, how do I be involved in a civic process?
And on top of that, with the immigration laws are changing very rapidly and very frequently. And we are all seeing what's happening around us to the immigrants and many immigrants, right? And that leads to a lot of fear because even being a naturalized citizen, your stay in the country is not safe and secure. So that would act as much more challenging than for like when you want them to step out, be involved in the civic process, you want to go out and vote. The question comes like, oh my God, my own safety, my living in this country is questionable. How can I do these kind of things? So that adds to the challenge. And again, we are also living at times where hate crimes are increasing. So there is a lot of concern about safety. And so that also adds to the many challenges that we have that are stopping our communities from going out and participating in the civic process.
And I'm sure you all feel what we've just described. It really begins with all of us. So what we're going to be covering today to really respond to all of our challenges and our unstable environment is the cycle of engagement, which, as you can tell, is a cycle. It never ends. And we continue to grow just as our leadership pathways grow with us. So the first thing that we start with is educating ourselves, which truly never ends. There's always more to learn. But I think Jason said it earlier, we need to understand how our local communities are structured and governed. And so we need to find out, and I encourage you all to do this, how your local municipality and your county, are they structured as a community council? Is it run by a commission? Do you have a rotating mayoral system? Or do you elect the mayor as a separate person other than council members? Every community works slightly differently. And once you find out how your community is structured, you get to understand who holds those positions. And you come to understand those people are residents just like you. And they are making decisions on your behalf, whether you personally voted for them or not. They are accountable to you because you are a resident in their town or in their city. You can also look up their voting record, which is true for the local, county, state, or national level. And interacting with your elected officials is a little bit easier than you think. So I'll toss it over to Sunayana to tell a story, her personal story about doing that.
So I'm going to share my personal story from when I lived in Kansas. This is what introduced me to advocacy and advocacy work, allowed me to leave my profession of being a data engineer and moving into the nonprofit. For everybody, the transition comes for many reasons. And for me, the transition happened because of a tragedy. In 2017, back when I was living in Kansas, I lost my husband to a hate crime shooting. My husband's shooter yelled, "Get out of my country," before pulling the trigger and killing him. This incident obviously had a profound impact on me. It not only made me a hate crime victim, but also a victim of the broken immigration system. As I was living in the United States as a dependent to my husband, and who was the principal holder of the work visa. I don't want to go into very much detail about the whole process because that's going to take the whole remainder of the workshop. But to quickly say, green cards are issued in various categories, and one of the categories is an employment-based category. And in the employment-based category, there are about 140,000 green cards that are given every year, which are capped at 7% per country, which then comes to about 10,000 green cards per country that are given. And obviously, countries like India and China and like Philippines is a country that it's adding to this number, where we are outnumbering the number of green cards that are being issued each year, which leads to a backlog. And so at the time of incident, though me and my husband, we were living in the country for more than a decade, we were still stuck in that backlog. And because I was holding a dependent status, I lost my status to stay in the country. And so at the time when I had to grieve, I was left with all these questions of why, right? And what is that I can do? And I was very grateful and fortunate that the right people came to me and allowed me to share my story, become a voice. And that's how I was introduced to an organization that was doing advocacy work around removing the country cap and making the employment-based green cards a much more fair process. And so I want to share a success story of meeting one of the senators and how we turned him to co-sponsoring the bill. So this was a Kansas Senator, Jerry Moran. We had a few meetings with his office, with his chief of staff and everybody, and every time there was a pushback. And finally, we were able to get an in-person meeting with the senator himself. And we were all sitting in the room with him, and we went with our stories, our points of why we think this broken system has to be fixed. And towards the end of it, I mean, we also went over time. The senator was generous enough to allow us to go over time. And at the end of it, when we asked him, what else do you want to hear from us, or what more do we need to do to convince you to get your support on this bill? And while his chief of staff was saying that, okay, we're going to discuss, or my boss is going to come back, he ignored his chief of staff to say, I am co-sponsoring the bill. And that moment, I mean, everybody in that room, we almost had tears of joy, because at that moment, our faith and our belief that if you don't give up and if you are persistent and you approach, then things come to a reality. And as you said, to make somebody accountable, we need to be self-accountable. And so I think that is what we all did that day to, again, reaffirm our faith that why having a voice matters.
Thank you, Sunayana. Thank you for sharing that. And I think your story demonstrates that we don't need a lot of money. We don't need to have a lot of resources to actually fight for ourselves. All we need is each other. And so another part of actually accessing your legislators and educating yourself, as Sunayana did with help from others, is getting to know what does your local government or state government spend? How do they spend your tax dollars? So a budget is a statement of your values. I want you to remember that. And we elect officials in order to make budgetary decisions that affect our everyday lives. So this is an example from my home county of Miami-Dade. And they release every single year a figure of $1 chopped up into different fractions showing how they spend our taxpayer money. So you can see 18 cents go to public safety. 18% of the budget goes to public safety. So you can assess for yourself as a resident, a voter, and a taxpayer, do I agree with that? And do I agree with the impact that my county is making on my life? If I don't, or if I do, then I have something to say, and it is my right to voice that to the people whom I elect. The second step, if you are able to, is to register yourself to vote. And don't worry if you're not able to vote. We will also touch on, you can still be a part of the process. I advise you, be aware of the specific laws in your state. API Vote, we do a great job of providing the information online. You can check your voter registration status online as well in less than 5 minutes. If you don't remember if you're registered or not, or maybe it's your first time and you need to do so. Also, I would have you look into, does your city, county, or state offer translated voting materials? You would be surprised as to how many cities and counties do provide voting material in Korean or Mandarin or Hindi. And right here in Orange County, ACT was able to work with the supervisor of elections to actually provide, for the first time, translated Asian language material for voting in last year's election. And now we're going to get to a little bit of what Lewis had mentioned earlier, echo chambers and social media and kind of the fear-mongering that is happening because of misinformation and disinformation. Not only do we need trustworthy, accurate, nonpartisan sources of news, we need to be the people that others can rely on to provide that. And so you can see some sources here. API Vote ourselves, we have a newsletter, which you can subscribe to. We do our best to provide accurate, nonpartisan coverage of everything happening at the federal level, all of the executive orders and all of the changes around them, as well as what's happening in the states that we cover. NBC Asian America is also a great news source to cover our community. And just a special shout out to our Vietnamese community. You have an organization called Viet Fact Check, where you can go there and actually look at, are there stories that our aunties, our uncles, our cousins are talking about? Are they true or not? And have language to explain to them in Vietnamese and English what is actually happening. But how do you do that, right? How do you do that if you see something on WhatsApp and your auntie's talking to you about it and it does not look real? I'm going to give you some advice as an organizer, as someone who talks to people on a regular basis. When we encounter misinformation in real life, we listen to the person who's sharing it with us because it clearly has made an impression on them. It clearly sounds important to them. And ironically, we do not tell them that they're wrong. Because when you tell someone you are wrong, you shut down a conversation and they're going to walk away from you. And you don't want auntie to walk away from you. So we're going to validate the emotions that are underneath the myth that they have bought into, right? So is she feeling afraid for her personal safety? Is she concerned about the welfare of her children or, the education of her children? Is she concerned about the economy? And validate the fact that those are real feelings that you can also resonate with. And then you redirect that person to resources which they can turn to that are reliable and help address some of the stories and myths that are being pervaded by people who don't want and don't have the best interest for our community, but we do. So I hope that you all feel empowered when you come into these resources to actually talk to your friends and your family. Do you want to speak about trust at all, Sunayana, about languages or anything else?
I think for me, I think before I started doing more civic focused work, I never knew like language access would be such a big barrier. It is only through my past 1.5 years and 2 years of my involvement in this work and participating in many national conferences and doing this work, I've realized that language is the most barrier of how it could stop somebody from participating in civic process or voting, because if you're not able to understand the ballot, how are you expected to vote, right? And so that does make a difference. For me, that has come as a learning. And when it comes to trust, echoing to what Hannah has just shared, even in the Indian communities, WhatsApp is very popular. There is a lot of information that gets spread in WhatsApp. And so, I mean, my parents back home in India, even it gets to them. And then I'm like, no, don't that believe to that information and things like that. So I think it is very much important that you are not just relying on one source and you are doing your due diligence. And I know that takes time, that takes your away some time from some of your priorities, and it might be challenging. But if you are able to rely on some other trustworthy sources to verify that information, to make yourself more aware of what's happening.
Thanks, Sunayana. In an API Vote 2, we have all of the voter info you need in multiple languages on our website. So reaching our friends and family, I would ask you to think about, who do you speak to on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis? Who asks you for, where do I know a good realtor? Or who can I talk to for a good deal on replacing my roof? Who's your mechanic? Those are the people who rely on you for the best information. And so think about who those people are and how you can remind them to vote each year. And if you tell me, Hannah, everyone in my life votes, okay, then think one ring beyond that. And we know that outreach based on relationships is going to work so much better than strangers coming to you to remind you to vote. So that's the aspect of trust. We also want to talk about the workplace, since we're here at Ascend Engage, and some ideas for engaging your coworkers.
And again, as somebody who has worked in the corporate space, I know how challenging it is to be with ever-coming deadlines and things like that. So to be able to carve out time to find organizations to go and volunteer at the community, that might not be feasible to take that time separately, right? And so what is that you could do at your own workspace? Obviously, you would have to look into your HR policies. If you already have some employee-led groups, reach out to them into seeing how you could do things at a smaller level at your own works organization and still make a larger impact. Like you could look into organizing like table talk or discussion pods. And I used to work for an ad agency, so it was pretty normal for us to have beer tubs in our cafeteria. So after 4 p.m., people are hanging around and like having discussions. So food and drinks, they all go hand in hand. So maybe you could have a discussion lunch and learn or something like that. Or also collaborating with local other nonprofit organizations that are doing specifically this type of work and bringing them and organizing like a voter registration day. You could partner with like Legal Women Voters if you have a Legal Women Voters in the state that you live, or vote.org, or look up for other local organizations that are eligible to register voters, and like maybe you could do a registration drive. There are many other ways that you could do and still use your time in your workspace. And again, does your organization allow a paid time off for you to go and volunteer and to vote? If they're not doing that already, encourage them to do that so that you can have paid time off to go and access your right to vote.
Thanks for those ideas, Sunayana. And I want to talk about also voting your values. So it starts with you. You have to ask yourself, what are my values? What am I willing to make a decision on when it comes to the ballot? Because I think it was Jason as well who discussed, when we think about which candidate is best, who stands for what, there are barriers to that as well, but we have to be clear. What are we standing for and what do we care about? Because if you don't see someone on the ballot or who's running for office that stands for what you do, then there's a question that you have. What do you do about it? In fact, you can talk to candidates as a voter, as a resident. They regularly host events, town halls, to speak to them directly so you can share your own story and what you care about. At the same time, you consider yourself. Would I run for office? Do I have something to offer when it comes to leading my own community? And I would challenge you to think that, in fact, you do. So I encourage you to find, in whichever state you are in, an organization like ACT that you can become a member of, whom, when they need you, they can bring you in to the events that they're hosting and engage the community. Check your own voter registration status online, which you can do. You can scan this QR code to go to our API Vote website on the Get Involved page. You can sign up to be a volunteer on our multilingual hotline. But it's a free service that we provide all around the country during elections where people can call and you can receive information and help in registering and voting in English and in many other Asian languages. So if you speak a language other than English and you want to volunteer, we are always welcoming that, and we need it. And finally, if you feel so compelled, you can donate to API Vote, and you would be funding organizations like ACT and around the country, as well as our young leaders who are coming up in the system, learning how to organize and to do work like this with you all. I do want to thank again Ascend, their API Futures podcast, which you can like, subscribe, and follow on these platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube.